So we're going to really continue our discussion of how to discover our true nature, as we discussed this began yesterday, but even if we weren't here yesterday, it won't matter. So we think as our motivation, and we'll sing a little prayer, but we can think it first in English, just think the thoughts. We're thinking, there's two parts of this prayer. The first part are for those of us who kind of already figure we are Buddhists. We've kind of committed ourselves to being Buddhists. So it's kind of reiterating our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings, sort of programming our mind with that thought. And the second two lines are expressing this marvelous, big, altruistic, we'd say reason or purpose for being together. And the Lamas would say our motivation. It means the same. So what's that? Well, we're thinking we're going to listen to these teachings. So the first two lines say, until we're enlightened, we're going to rely upon the Buddha, his teachings, and the spiritual community. And the second two lines say, by the virtuous kind of seeds we plant in our mind by listening to these teachings, may we become a Buddha, no matter how long it takes. So we really can then be a benefit to others, which is the long-term goal, you know. By the time to discover our true nature. So I'm seeing 2 times in Tibetan.
Page 98.
Huh?
From page 98.
Oh, yeah, if you want to join in, 98. Sangye charam soke chokdamla jangcho badu dagi kyap suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drona pinche sangye drupasho sangye charam soke chokdamla jangcho badu dagi kyap suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drona pinche sangye drupasho. All right. So, you know, there's different ways of entering into Buddhism. You can see this around the world. There are different traditions, you know, starting in India and then going off to China and Japan and other areas in Asia, and then Tibet in about the 7th century, where it stayed virtually in Asia that whole time, isn't it? I mean, a few travelers from other countries might have come over the mountains and got to Tibet, but not many. I think the Catholics went there, the Jesuits. They went there in the 14th century. They even translated the Bible into Tibetan, but they couldn't get one Tibetan. They were quite happy. Thank you very much. So they left. So they stayed intact in Tibet, certainly for centuries, you know, until, of course, as we know, in 1950, their neighbours, the Chinese communists, kind of barged in. So now then thousands of Tibetans left. So now Buddhism, we can see, is spreading around the rest of the world. So there's different, we can see the different ways of presenting Buddhism. It's very clear. Different entry points. And each suits the kind of mind that a person has, you know. So there's Zen style. Then you've got Theravadan, you've got the teachings in Burma and Thailand. Then you have Vietnam, which has some got Mahayana component. Japan, Mahayana component. Then you have Tibet. So Tibet really is where all the teachings, starting from the Hinayana level, the Mahayana, and then not only the Mahayana, but the more advanced levels, the Vajrayana, the Tantrayana, the more sophisticated levels of Buddhist philosophy and psychology and practice. But all of which came from India, but only the Vajrayana, only the Tantrayana, finally, within the Mahayana, was only really went to Tibet and still intact in Tibetan Buddhism, you know. So then in Tibet over the centuries, different traditions have been developed, right? Different approaches, people enter into different doorways. So one way for sure you can say that what Buddhism is that very simple, it's a method to stop suffering and get happy. That's it. It's almost too simple, you know, how to stop suffering and how to get happiness. And you think that of all things would be the most delicious, because we all know we want happiness and we don't want suffering. In fact, the Buddha would point out that's the most fundamental drive of every living being. Spontaneously, you don't need your mother doesn't have to teach you that. It's a spontaneous drive to have happiness and not have suffering. In fact, Buddha's first teaching that he gave in Varanasi, near Varanasi, a place now called Sarnath, where there's a place called Deer Park, where he gave his first teaching after becoming enlightened in Bodh Gaya. He walked a few days, you know, and got to Varanasi and went and taught in Deer Park. His first teaching was the 4 facts of life for the noble ones. They usually call them the Four Noble Truths. I don't think the truths are noble. It's the four facts for the noble ones. Noble one, I think, is a term used to refer to someone who's done the job of achieving freedom from suffering and its causes.
I'm so sorry, Venerable Robina. May I please interrupt? Can we move the microphone a little bit closer to you? We're getting a little bit of an echo.
Okay. Echo. So what's the echo about?
Well, I just think that I think it's the sound in the Gompa. If it's just a little closer to you, I think
Do we
it'll
need
be
a tip on mic? Is there such a thing?
You want to try that?
Is that better? I don't know. What's the better way to do this? If I can hold it. Come here, I'll hold it. How about that?
Maybe turn off.
Is that better, people?
Yes, it is much better, Venerable Robina. If it's not too much trouble,
What are
that's
they
fine
saying?
for us.
It's better. Okay, I'll hold it like a rock star. Like that. Like eating an ice cream. That's right. That's right. How about that? How about that? People on Zoom, is that good? People on Zoom, I have to see their response. I can't see. Is that better?
Yeah, that's
What do they
perfect.
say? Okay, that's better. So I can wave my hands now. Okay. Okay. So there's one method, one approach, which sounds very delicious. How to stop suffering and how to get happy. One. Second approach, or another way of presenting what Buddhism is actually a method of ethics, which is kind of interesting. A good ethics, how to live a life of good ethics. And the other way, which sounds a bit abstract initially, is it's a method of stopping ignorance and getting wisdom. So I'm not sure we want wisdom. I mean, I don't think we think we're ignorant, but we certainly know we want happiness and we don't want suffering. And we're not sure about ethics. It sounds a bit strict, got someone squeezing you and telling you what to do. But happiness for sure. But what's interesting, and I find this really important to understand, is that they all come together. They're not separate. And what's most fascinating is that the method for getting happy, finally, is to get wisdom. Because the Buddha is saying, and we're going to discuss this, the Four Noble Truths, we're going to discuss, in the Four Noble Truths, the first one is there is suffering. And so Buddha articulates there are 3 levels of suffering. And we do understand, if we want to properly understand Buddhism, we have to properly understand this. 3 levels of suffering. Then the second one is there are causes of suffering. And it seems to me that if you've got a problem, the first thing, in order to get rid of the problem, you have to first establish the causes. If you can't establish the cause of a problem, I don't think you'll find the solution, because the solution is embedded in discovering the cause. So this is exactly what's happening here. First one is there is suffering. Second, there are causes. And these we have to understand really clearly, because this is the essence of the Buddhist approach to life. The essence of the Buddhist view of the universe is the causes of suffering and therefore the causes of happiness, the same. But third is that you can be free of suffering and its causes. That state, there is a state. And 4, how to do it. It's extremely practical. So we understand the causes. Then we're going to understand this idea that the degree to which our minds are caught up in states of mind, and we discussed this in depth yesterday, the degree to which we are caught up in states of mind that 1, are deeply in themselves, deeply disturbing, but 2, have this really specific characteristic of causing us, of being delusional. This is a very curious concept. The extent to which our minds are caught up in states of mind that are very disturbing, which is the suffering component, but extremely delusional, is the extent we are not in touch with wisdom. is the extent to which we're not in touch with how things exist. Now, this seems so abstract. To think that you've got to learn to find yourself, you learn to develop wisdom to get in touch with reality is the method to stop suffering. Sounds very abstract to us, you know, because we can see very clearly in our culture, we've got incredible levels of wisdom, of intelligence, of brilliance. Look at the brilliance, and this is the peak of our culture, isn't it? Science, scientific knowledge is said to be the peak. Well, you know very well you can have a person who's an absolute genius, you know, knows every answer to everything in terms of math, let's say, or physics or something. You genius, have genius wisdom, but still go home and beat up their husband and children. Because you don't have any concept that wisdom is related to happiness or that wisdom is related to ethics. And this is the point. You cannot, in the Buddhist view, you cannot separate having good ethics from wisdom from happiness. They all come together. And this is really interesting to hear. Let's try and show that, you know. So the Four Noble Truths answered these four truths for the noble ones, or four facts. Truth sounds a bit sort of fundamentalist. A fact. I like the word fact. I like the word fact. The four facts for the noble ones, those who realized it. So the one is there is suffering. So we have to really understand Buddhism in the big picture. We have to understand this first one. So the first kind of suffering is the one we all know. It's easy. He calls it, the Buddha calls it the suffering of suffering. It's like in your face suffering. And it's really simple. It's when the bad things happen. It's like a very simple way of putting it. Anything from the slightest knee ache to the most intense agony. We can see that. That's the only way we understand suffering in our world. And because when it comes to compassion, the only ones we have compassion for are the ones who are experiencing the suffering of suffering. Those who are experiencing the bad things. Poverty, sickness, torture, war, etc. So it's an eye-opener and shocking initially and hard to understand. There's subtle levels of suffering that Buddha talks about. But if we want to properly understand Buddhism, we have to understand these subtle levels. So to really understand this, then we have to go to the second of these facts, which is the causes. What are the causes of these levels of suffering? So the first one's called the suffering of suffering. The second one is called simply the suffering of change. It sounds kind of boring. When we really get this, we really begin to understand what Buddha's talking about. You know? And the third one's even more abstract for us. And they call that conditioned suffering or all-pervasive suffering. It's really quite abstract, but we'll look at it. So in terms of the fourth noble truth, which is the methodology, how you get rid of suffering and its causes, there's a typical way that's taught in Buddhist teachings called the eightfold path, you know, the eightfold path. But the way in Tibet, and certainly in the Gelugpas, which is the tradition that we're discussing here in this center, our lamas are educated in, that I'm educated in, the Gelugpas, there's different ways in Tibet of presenting Buddhist teachings, all come to the same thing, just different methods, different doorways. The methodology is presented in this packaging of the teachings called the Labyrinth. I mean, everybody who's a Tibetan Buddhist, if you read one Gelugpa book, you're going to hear this word 1,000 times. If you have had one teaching from Lama Zopa, read one teaching from Lama Zopa, you'll hear the term Labyrinth. So what it essentially is, I mean, literally it means gradual path, gradual road, you know, gradual. So what it is really a course. I tell you, the word course is what we immediately understand. You go study music or cooking, whether it's a weekend course or a 10-year course, or you go become a surgeon or whatever. You do a course. We instantly understand the implication of a course. You start with the simple stuff, you go to the middle stuff, you go to the advanced stuff, and then you graduate. It's gradual. We get that instantly. But I mean, no matter how many times we hear the word labyrinth, even though we hear it all these years, you still kind of get puzzled. You know, labyrinth, what do you mean? It's a gradual path. Even the term gradual path sounds weird. But as soon as you say it's a course, oh, I get it. Okay. But it's of course it's gradual. We even say grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. You know, then you graduate. We get the concept. So it's a course. So what's in that course? What's the information in that course? What are you trying to learn in that course? Well, the end result tells you, doesn't it? You're on a course to become a musician. You know the end result is you graduate as a musician. You graduate as a cook. You graduate as a surgeon. You graduate as an acupuncturist. There's the goal, isn't there? That's clear. And then you know how long it takes you. You're heading towards that. And you know no matter how long it takes you, that everything that's in that course is programmed very nicely to lead you from one to the next, to the next, to the next. We just get that so automatically. We don't have to puzzle. But as soon as we hear the word Lam Rim and that it's confusing to us because we don't think of spiritual part. We don't think of spiritual teachings like that. Simple, middle, and more difficult. We don't think like that. In fact, for example, there's one analogy that I use 1,000 times that is a way of presenting this entire course, is called, a bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. So the wisdom wing is the first and second, as we know well, the terms they use are the first and second scopes of this Lam Rim. That's the wisdom wing. Then another way of packaging of all the teachings, we hear about the Hinayana teachings. That's, in Thailand and Burma, for example. Then we hear the Mahayana teachings. Well, the first two, so that as Lama Zopa would politely, the way Lama Zopa politely honoring the lineage would say, the very first level of the practices and teachings in the Lam Rim are those practices and teachings suitable to the disciple of the least capability. That's how they say it. It's a mouthful. Sometimes I refer to it as the teachings of the lowest scope, the person with the least capability. It sounds kind of also a bit rude, maybe. I'm not one of them, least capability. So then, but I would call it junior school. It's not literally accurate, but it's a concept we all get, Then you've got the middle scope, teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the middle capability. Why not high school? Well, that's the wisdom wing. That's the wisdom wing. So if you graduated there, you're on the Hinayana path. You're on the Hinayana path, and you do the job. The very first scope, you learn. This is again where the three levels of suffering come in. If you practice the lowest scope, the first scope, in terms of the Four Noble Truths, the fourth one being the methodology of how to get rid of suffering and its causes, you do junior school, which is essentially abiding by the laws of karma. This is where ethics comes in. The detailed presentation in Buddhism of Buddha's worldview, Buddha's view of the world, what runs the world, the law that runs the world. And this is where the whole concept of no creator comes in, and how the law of karma is this natural law, a natural law that runs the universe, or a law within which the universe runs. No one made it up. Buddha's not a creator. He observed it. It's a really important point to get. So abiding by the law of karma, controlling your body, speech, and then eventually and stop harming others, you at least, that's the method for you stopping your future suffering. The first kind of suffering. By abiding by the laws of karma, entering into junior school, and if you stop there, you would guarantee that you would stop future suffering, and you can continue to get a nice human rebirth with nice conditions, and you keep moving forward. If you go to high school, middle scope, and this is where you where you start to look into the second level of suffering and look into the deeper causes of suffering, and essentially that's called attachment. Effectively, for the Four Noble Truths, attachment is the main cause of suffering. So we look deeply into the suffering caused by attachment, which is the suffering of change, which is more subtle for us to see, harder to see. And we did this, and then we graduated after junior school and high school, first and second scopes, the wisdom wing, the Theravada part of the path. If you graduated there, you would then realize emptiness and cut the root completely, which we talked about yesterday. And then you would stop the third kind of suffering, all pervasive suffering. And then when you finished your job, one life or other, you would achieve your nirvana, your liberation from suffering. And then when you die, honey child, you don't come back. You're out of here. If you're on the Mahayana path, you can go to the third scope, the compassion wing, and you now accomplish bodhicitta. And then finally you would achieve Buddhahood. So the goal of the Mahayana path, and this is the context of all the teachings of Tibet, is Buddhahood. Buddha, free of all the delusions, the first syllable. Second syllable implies developing to perfection all the goodness. So this is the job. So you're on this path, you're in this course, and it might last several lifetimes, this course, might achieve it in one lifetime. You might, on the other hand. Depends on how much you've done in the past life, how much you bring with you. then you would graduate as a Buddha. You graduate as a Buddha, basically. Putting it like that. That makes sense, you know. So what is this? What is it you're internalizing? What's the information? You know, if it's music, you know all about music. You squeeze your brain with musical theory. If it's cooking, we know that theory. If it's engineering, we know these concepts. So what it is, and this is where it's puzzling for us. What is it that you're internalizing as a Buddhist? What's the information you're learning as a Buddhist? What makes you graduate as a Buddha? What is it that you're doing? Well, the commonest, this is where we can be confused, because the commonest view of a Buddhist is a person who sits on their bottom with their eyes closed and is watching their breath. I mean, being a bit sarcastic, you know. And the word meditation is massive. So we almost equate a Buddhist with being a meditator. And if you don't meditate, you can't be a Buddhist. I mean, it's just absurd. No logic to it whatsoever. So what is a Buddhist? What are you trying to do? Okay. If you're trying to rid your mind of all the delusions, which is what Bud implies, why would you do that? The second noble truth, the causes of suffering, Buddha tells us they are the main cause. I'm going to go into that. So you therefore got to find out what a delusion is. And if the second one, Buddha, is like the first one's the wisdom wing, Da is like the compassion wing, and that's where you've perfected all the virtues, all the goodness. This is where ethics come from, but wisdom as well. So if you are a Buddha, you rid the mind of all the delusions, which are the causes of suffering, and you've developed to perfection all the virtues, all the goodness, all the clarity, all the wisdom, all the virtuous qualities. You've got these two, you're a Buddha. So if that's the result, then first of all, it's pretty evident what the job is. That tells you, that implies the methodology. If the result is to have a mind that's no longer got delusions in it, and have a mind that's full of all the virtues, if that's the result, then the job is evident. You better learn to distinguish between delusions and virtues. There's one way of saying what the entire job of being a Buddhist is from beginning to end. That's it. That's the essence of being a Buddhist. That's the essence. And that everything you do, sit on your bottom and watch your breath, do mantras, wear maroon robes from Tibet or grey robes from China, or show your head, showing up a nun, so-called. Anything you would do on the way to that has to be something that would help you do that. If there's anything you do as a Buddhist, do a mandala, do a prostration, say a mantra, speak Tibetan, speak Indian, speak Sanskrit, shave your head, walk slowly, work on your mind. Whatever it is you do would have to be a technique that would help you, one, lessen your delusions, two, grow your virtues. That's it. It's almost too simple. It is simple. It's not complicated. It just takes a while. Could be a few lifetimes. What? And we've got to look at why. So initially, Tibetan Buddhism especially looks completely confusing, isn't it? So where do I begin? The commonest question, where do I begin? First you walk in, you see a place that's culturally Tibetan, which is already peculiar for us. I mean, I'm looking like a Tibetan. Look at me. This is how Tibetan monks and nuns look. Well, they probably look, whatever. Anyway, roughly like this. That's okay. That's respectful. Until we eventually got our own style. Like Mother Teresa went off to India and dressed as an Indian, didn't she? And sari and everything. We're still dressed like Tibetans. It's okay, nothing wrong. But so Tibet's just a package, Tibet's just not the essence of it. Japan's not the essence. Australia's not the essence. They're just packages, karmic packages, So we've got to get to the essence of it. So one way of saying what the essence of Buddhism is to get wisdom, to get happiness, and to practice ethics, it comes to the mind. That's what we discussed yesterday. The mind is central. The mind runs the universe. Individual minds run the universe. Individual minds create their own suffering. Individual minds create their own happiness. There's no concept of a creator in Buddhism. This is something that's hard to hear. You think, well, how come it's religious if that's the case? Because we assume that religion equals a creator. It's found that's a mistaken conception. I mean, it's not being rude. If you've had great devotion to a creator, it might be shocking to hear that. That's Buddha's findings, his own findings. So, okay, let's look then at these four noble truths. The first one, the suffering of suffering, which is when the bad things happen. It's the broadest way to put it, simple enough. And there's two different ways of describing that. The one that's usually more easy for us to comprehend is within the framework of being a human. The bigger picture point of view, as we know if we start to study some Buddhism, is that the bigger picture point of view is from the entire point of view of his view of the entire universe. in which he would say humans are a tiny percentage. There are other realms of existence, other types of sentient beings. Mind possessors, the term in Tibetan, Senchen, mind possessor. There are trillions upon trillions upon trillions of these mind possessors. Humans are a miniature percent. And even animals and all the bugs and the creatures, the billions of trillions of them, are also a tiny percentage. There are others that we can't see, happy ones and very suffering ones. There's a bigger picture, the whole kind of concept of the 6 realms of existence within samsara. So the broader way of seeing this concept of suffering is in terms of these realms. But a narrower way, the one we find manageable, is in terms of this human life. So what's the suffering of suffering then within this life? It's pretty clear. As soon as it goes wrong, as soon as your knee hurts, this is maybe running out of battery already.
No, it's because it's Wi-Fi.
Is what?
Because it's Wi-Fi.
Oh, I see. Okay. So, the suffering of suffering is when the bad things happen. It's pretty straightforward. We recognize those moments. But the suffering of change is much more subtle, harder to see, but we need to understand. Let's look at that one, try to unpack it logically. And the third one is even supposedly more abstract, but that's, so the solution, but putting it this way, that in terms of the 4th noble truth, which is the methodology, instead of presenting the eightfold path, we can present the labyrinth instead. So the first scope of practice, which is essentially abiding by the laws of karma, not harming others, that's the solution for you to stop future suffering. Knee aches, being harmed, abused, lied to, raped, stolen from, poor, sick. That's called suffering, right? Well, Buddha's got methods because he tells us in the 2nd noble truth what the causes are, which we'll look at. So he's got a solution. He's found the causes and he's got a solution. So you stop creating the causes of future suffering. So you stop harming others. We're going to look at that. That's the first stroke. That's how you stop the first kind of suffering. The second kind of suffering is the mind. We start to look at attachment. So by giving up attachment and the other delusions that come from it, anger and the rest, you stop the second kind of suffering, which is the suffering of change. And the third one, when you realize emptiness, when you cut the root of all delusions, you cut all suffering, you cut all pervasive suffering, and then you're out of samsara altogether. So some of the causes of suffering. So the Buddha would say that the law of karma, which we learn about in the first scope, which we're discussing it here, the law of karma is the law of cause and effect for the Buddha. So we can understand cause and effect. Where genius is added, that's the scientific world. We're brilliant at understanding the laws of cause and effect when it comes to gardens, music, cakes, buildings. Look at us. The evidence of this modern world is the proof. We understand brilliantly and precisely the causes of a computer, the causes of a cup, the causes of a garden, the causes of a 100-story building, and why, for example, that building, therefore we know why that building in Florida collapsed, because something was faulty in the structure or one of the components was not accurate. So we can be very precise, and the laws of cause and effect are like this, and we can be confident in these laws. Well, that's the certainty that Buddha has about the law of cause and effect when it comes to the causes of happiness and the causes of suffering, and they call it the law of karma. I don't speak Sanskrit, and I've heard it means something like the word action or something. But it's this natural law. A natural law is something unbelievably important to think about. Natural law means what? So in Christian terms, I always quote this endlessly, but it's a really crucial thing to understand if we want to understand Buddhism properly. Let's just put our own meanings into it. Ask my Jesuit priest friend, please, what is a sin? What defines an action as being wrong? He said, by definition, an action is wrong. It's a sin, or the Buddhists would say a negative action. By definition, is an action that is doing what God said not to do. Or as they say, going against God's will. Now, if you posit a creator, and that's your view, that's completely appropriate. That's exactly correct. But Buddha doesn't assert a creator. There's not a creator, he says. We don't need one. He says it's a misinterpretation. He has his own views about what a superior being is. We can all become one. And he calls him a Buddha. We can all become one. We don't need creating. A whole different discussion. We'll go into this in karma. So the law of cause and effect is what runs the universe. And this is the thing about a natural law. You know very well, Einstein, he didn't invent, let's say, the concept of E equals mc squared. He observed it. He articulated it and he presented it. That's a huge difference. He's not the creator of it. A botanist doesn't create botany. A botanist is a clever person who observed the natural workings of the universe and, observed it and articulated it. That's a natural law. Well, karma, such that every sentient being, every mind possessor, whatever we think and do and say every millisecond, is necessarily sowing a seed in that mind, programs that mind, sows seeds in that mind, such that in the future they will ripen as the experiences of that person. That's the law of karma. And it's a natural law. No one invented it and no one runs it. But what we hear is, we hear the dualistic view of punishment and reward, which is the typical view in most religions, or even in the world. There's punishment and reward. Mummy says, do this and you're naughty, and you don't, and you'll get punished. If you get caught running through the red light, you'll get punished. If you do a good thing, you want to be rewarded. So we have that view very deep in our bones. But there's no concept like that in Buddhism, even though we think it sounds like that. There can't be if there's no creator. No one's judging and no one's rewarding. That really takes time to think, because the guilty, neurotic way we feel, we think it means that. It takes a while to hear there's no such concept as that, because there's no creator, there's no punisher, there's no rewarder. It's a natural law. So the concept of punishment and reward is like, if you go to your doctor and she says, if you keep smoking, you'll get cancer. And then you go home and you discover that the doctor's not there. Well, she's not going to see me smoke, so out come the Marlboros. Oh, I won't get cancer because my doctor's not seeing me. You would be laughed at if you said that, wouldn't you? Because she's not a creator, she's not a punisher, she's not a rewarder, she's an advisor. She's observed the natural law that smoking can affect lungs in such a way that you can get cancer. That's the way Buddha's talking. But it's hard to hear this, because the second we hear about karma, that our suffering is the main result of actions we've done in the past, the second we hear that, we have a panic attack, That's why it's so important to hear that all our happy experiences, every millisecond, what we let call happiness for the Buddha. So, okay, jumping. Generally speaking, the law of karma. Generally speaking, okay, go back to the Four Noble Truths. So the second noble truth is there are causes of suffering. There are two components in there, two main causes of suffering. This is already fascinating because we think there are one cause of suffering, and that's called Fred, because he abuses me. Or equally, we think there's one cause of happiness, and that's called Mary, because she's kind to me. In other words, our view now, the philosophical view we have in our mind that no one's taught us, we just assume is the truth, which is coming from the Buddha says from our misconceptions, deep in our bones, is that the happiness and suffering come from out there. That's what we believe 100%, which is why it's hard to hear this simple presentation. The Buddha says the main causes of my happiness, this experience of happiness, which I think is caused by Mary being kind to me, giving me a present. Why are you happy, Robina? Oh, Mary gave me a gift. Why are you happy, Robina? Oh, the weather's lovely. Why are you suffering, Robina? Well, Mary was unkind. That's the logic we use. We never question it. And that's the basis of all of our views about happiness and suffering. But monkeys and dogs are the same. No one taught them. It's deep in our bones. It's a misconception, Buddha says, in the depth of our being, that we've been believing in for countless eons, which is why we suffer, he says, because we've got a wrong view, misconception. So his observation is, yes, indeed, Mary's gift does definitely play a role. Definitely she plays a role. Her gift is but it's a catalyst. It's a good way to put it. It's a catalyst for my happiness. The main causes of my happiness are both in here. Two. One is past action, karma, an action, for example, similar to the result, driven too by a virtuous state of mind. Karma and a virtuous state of mind. Action and a virtuous state of mind. And the two subsume to the one. The mind is the main thing. Same with suffering. Fred is unkind. Why are you suffering, Robina? It's Fred. So he does play a role. His punch definitely did play a role, but it's a catalyst. The main causes of my suffering, like the happiness, are past action that sowed a seed in my mind that was driven by a delusion. And that sowed a seed in my mind that I didn't pull out. So now 2.5 lives later, you meet that person, because karma is pretty personal, and the moment of suffering ripens. Same with the happiness. So as an explanation, this is really not complicated. But it's so shocking only because the view we have already is profoundly different. We have a totally different view programmed in our minds, you know. So it's hard to even hear the words, even to repeat what I just said would be hard for us because we think so utterly differently. So we hear it so wrongly. So it really takes time to unpack it and listen carefully and take it on board. So of course you can't prove it immediately, just like you can't prove E equals MC squared immediately. That's absurd. You start with the hypothesis that E equals MC squared is true. When you start learning, you start with math, and you start learning 1 + 1 is 2, and you move gradually forward until eventually you're equipped with the ability to then comprehend eventually E equals MC squared. Same here with karma. It's a subtle level of mind we have to access in order to see the truth of this. But as His Holiness the Dalai Lama tells us, if you move along on Buddha's methodology of deciding you're going to take it on board, and at some point, you discover from your own direct experience that actually it is wrong, of course you must reject it. That's the approach in Buddhism. It's not belief. It's just intellectual laziness. So the first cause of my suffering is a past action that I did that sowed a seed in my mind that was driven by a delusion. As an explanation of suffering, it's always so absurdly simple. It's like, really? That's it? Can't be right, you know. This is Buddha's explanation. So, okay, if that action, a karmic action done by the body and speech, number one, driven by a delusion in the mind, number two, then tells us that we have to learn the entire body of Buddha's philosophical and psychological views of the universe. I mean, they studied this stuff for 25 years in the monasteries in Tibet, you know. It's like you have to study for quite a few years to get E equals MC squared. Can't get it just by saying the words. So let's look at karma. We discussed the mind yesterday, but let's look specifically at the suffering of attachment and why it causes what's called the suffering of change. We discussed it yesterday. We'll do it again today. So karma, this natural law of karma, natural law is the word to hear. This Jesuit priest said there is some component of natural law in, say, for example, killing. And natural law means that, and this is Buddha's view, but sentient beings don't like getting killed. It's pretty much proof, isn't it? You do some market research. Do people like getting harmed even? Forget killing. Do you like getting killed, lied to, stolen from? No, thank you. It's pretty evident. There's a natural law. Well, this Jesuit priest said there's some aspect of natural law in Buddha's, in Jesus telling us that we should not kill. But the main reason behind it is because God said so. And this is, as I said to you, it's massive. But the Buddha saying, so Jesus says don't kill. Why not? Because God says. Buddha says don't kill. Why not? Well, this is a crucial thing now. First point is he defines at least a major negative action, which is one that harms another, as one that harms another. But in his very first level of instructions in junior school, entry level, grade 1, the lowest scope of teachings, the essence of which is this business of karma, his reason for exhorting us to not kill, not steal, and not cheat on your partner, jump on the wrong partner, that's the first 3 actions of the body, which are actions we can see driven by anger or attachment, and then 4 of the speech. They're our main one. We humans, we might go, I mean, in this room, maybe we don't go around killing and stealing from too many people, perhaps. But we absolutely do the speech one. So there's 4 of speech that he would recommend we cease doing. So all these 7 actions, the last 3 is something else. These 7 actions are all actions that harm others. They're by definition the heaviest negative actions because they harm others. They're not the only ones. They harm others. But the point is, the 4 of speech are don't lie, Don't abuse people with your mouth. Don't rabbit on about nothing. And don't badmouth people behind their backs. Which is probably our favourite. Because we can do it in peace, because people are agreeing with us, you know, you badmouth your politicians or your auntie or something like that, you know. You feel safe. So this is the point about karma, and this is the one we really do miss in our culture. When we hear that Buddha says, don't kill, don't steal, don't this, don't that, we kind of feel restricted, we feel suffocated, we feel sat upon, you know. And then we feel if we do it, we're naughty and we'll get punished. That's the default thought that our mind runs to. Mistake. What's Buddha telling us? One, he defines those actions as being actions that harm others, which is what defines them as being negative. But why he exhorts us not to do them at this point in practice and throughout our entire practice to Buddhahood. The reason behind his exhorting us not to kill is guess what, Robina, sweetie pie? Because that will cause you future suffering. Until we get this, we don't understand Buddha's teachings. If we just hear it as you're naughty if you kill, you'll get punished. And anyway, or maybe because people don't like killing, it sounds like a nice thing not to do. We haven't got it properly. The part we miss is because we have, in other words, the very first level of practice, the wisdom wing, we are the beneficiary. The reason the beginning not to kill is because you don't want future suffering. This is really hard for us to hear. I mean, karma is a hard one for us to hear. To think that we can get another life and that what we experience in that life is the fruit of what we've done. In other words, it's hard to hear that we create our own reality. It's a really intense one. But I think it's the most mind-blowing concept. That we're in charge, you know. We can be in charge. We must be in charge. We have to learn to run the show. We have to know that we create our own happiness and we create our own suffering. It's got nothing to do with punishment and reward, which is how we hear it. And then we have to want not to have future suffering. In the same way, you don't not smoke because your doctor said. You don't just not smoke because you could be a good girl. You have to be driven by the wish not to have cancer. When you really know the advantages to you of not smoking, you will then make the effort to not smoke. So in other words, we have to understand that everything we think and do and say brings its own consequences. We think of consequences as someone finding you out and someone punishing you. That's why we think if someone doesn't see you do something naughty, oh, I got away with it. And that's very instinctive in us. So to get past that is quite hard. Karma demands ownership. It demands growing up. It demands responsibility. I created myself. All my happiness is the fruit of my virtue, and all my suffering is the fruit of my non-virtue. As a concept, it's pretty straightforward, but it sort of sounds a bit fundamentalist, you know, these kind of heavy terms. In psychology, we don't like the word non-virtue and virtue. It sounds too religious, you know, it sounds judgmental. We need to understand this, and what do I say? Buddhism. So a negative action, a heavy one in general, is one that harms another. But why, at the first level, Buddha demands we do, exhorts us, not demand, he can't, he's not a boss. He's like a good doctor recommending from his own experience the best medicine. The first one is, you don't want suffering in the future. So think of it. If I do consider the possibility that I will take another human rebirth when I die, which is the fruit of virtuous karma, by the way. And in that life, do I want bad experiences? Do I want to be lied to? Do I want to be stolen from? Look at the world. Okay, look at the world right now and look at the suffering you see right now. So then think, do I want that? You don't want to be in Ukraine right now. You don't want to be a Russian soldier full of rage and wanting to torture someone they don't even know why. You don't want to be having such delusion you're going crazy out of your brain. You don't understand what's going on. You don't want to be poor, working 8 hours a day for a bowl of rice. You don't want to be seen as an ugly person who no one trusts and likes. You know we don't want any of this suffering. It's so obvious. It's so staring us in the face. You know you don't want that suffering. Then the question is, you have to first ask the question, well, I wonder what the cause is. And we're using Buddha's view here, past actions. And then you think, well, if I do live in the future, I don't want that. So what's the solution? Well, don't cause it. If you don't want cancer, then don't cause it. It's not complicated. We make it complicated. So we are the beneficiary of abiding by the laws of karma. We are the beneficiary. We are the direct beneficiary of having good ethics. We're so used to hearing it as a sort of, oh, you're seen as a nice girl, you'll get rewarded. It's very strong in us. That's not the point at all. We are the direct beneficiary of our behaving nicely, of our not killing, not stealing, not lying. We are the direct beneficiary. And of course, as Lama Zopa says, at this level of practice, all the rats and cockroaches will have a party because you leave them in peace. They will benefit too. But the reason is not to benefit them yet. That's the compassion we. This is for the benefit of us. It's like compassion for ourselves. But we don't hear it like that. We just hear it as punitive. So we hear it properly. We grow up. You take responsibility. So that means every time something bad happens, you own it and you learn from it. I don't want that in the future, so I'll stop causing it. But what we tend to do is, oh, I must have been a bad person in the past. I'm so guilty. I'm so bad. I'm the blame. We stay stuck in that misery and that guilt. That's just the tendency we have now. It's the irony of ego. You know? So we've got to unpack this stuff carefully. Hear it carefully. Hear it, you know, with the intent that Buddha has. But it's hard to, because when you read the Tibetan literature, it quite sort of sounds quite fundamentalist, you know. 400 million lifetimes in this realm by doing one bad action. It sounds very shocking. You can't hear it. But to try to hear the principle of it is really important. So when we begin to grow up, you take responsibility. So a negative action in general, the heaviest level is one that harms another. But the reason Buddha exhorts us not to do it is so that we will not suffer, because it's the cause of our future suffering. So that's what they mean by renunciation. You're not renouncing happiness, you're renouncing suffering and the causes. So when you renounce cigarettes, you're renouncing the suffering of cancer. Because they don't use that word, that's all. And of course it's hard. You're addicted to cigarettes or addicted to alcohol or addicted to, you know, jumping on someone else's boyfriend or something. It's hard to give up habits. We know that. So we have to know the reason why we want to do it. So the two causes of suffering in the second noble truth, one is karma, past action, and two, the main cause is the delusion that drove you to do it. Which let's say, and so here we learn about the mind. And here we can think first, the first kind of suffering, you know, when you get up. So think of your life so far in this life. And well, let's look at the three ways in this life that our past actions ripen. There are four ways altogether. By understanding these four ways is a revelation. We can understand these four ways clearly, that we can just look at our lives and understand why things happen. So the four ways that karma ripens. The first is the type of rebirth you get. So here we've got a happy rebirth. It's a human rebirth. And in general, to get a human birth as opposed to a mosquito's is obviously harder because there's much less humans than mosquitoes, isn't it? They're all sentient beings. So clearly it's harder to create the causes to get a human mummy. I mean, it's like winning the lottery. It's so astonishing. So due to past non-killing, especially non-killing, the accumulation of non-killing karma, especially as Lama Zopa says, practice in the context of living in vows of non-killing. And that's another whole discussion, the thesis of vows. And we'll talk about it. I'm sure over the next 2 weeks we're going to cover all this. So each of us, we can deduce that at the time of our past death, not more than a few weeks before we found our way to our present mother's human womb, or her fallopian tube, or wherever it was, or maybe it was a petri dish. At the time before we stop breathing, once the death process, as they call it, once that starts, and that could take several hours perhaps, once that process started, and before you stop breathing, one of your millions, one of our millions of karmic virtue, in our case, one of our virtuous karmic seeds, specifically of non-killing, stored in our mind. I like saying stored in our bank vaults. One of those was triggered because we must have died fairly peacefully. So when we died fairly peacefully, which is why it's important to die peacefully, because then the mind has the space to enable a virtuous karmic seed in one of your bank vaults to be triggered. So in our case, a virtuous karmic seed of non-killing was triggered, and then our death would have been very peaceful. And even from that moment that the virtuous karmic seed was triggered, before we even stopped breathing, already that was programming us to be specifically reborn a few weeks later in our present mother's body. You know, already that's planned. Your mummy and daddy might not even have met yet. But already your past karma with his mother and father have been triggered. That seed is triggered. Then you die. You go into this intermediate state, like a dream state, and then eventually when they hop into bed or wherever they hopped, your mind runs like a magnet into that mother's fallopian tube. Very specific. It's not random. They don't make you. That's a joke. They give you a body. How kind. But you bring your own mind with you. So the first way our karma has ripened in this life is we got this human body. Okay. The next three play out in the life itself. So let's look at this. It's pretty clear. One is called the intentions or tendencies similar to the cause. Well, that's our mind. Look at our mind. Some of us can be good at music, good at football, good at laziness, good at killing, good at lying, good at love, good at kindness. Look at us. All of our tendencies, whether they're artistic or intellectual or experiential or psychological, all the same. There are a bunch of tendencies. There are a bunch of habits. And they do not come from mummy or daddy or a creator or from nothing. They're habits. What does a habit mean by definition? Something you've done before in a past life. That's the Buddha's assumption here. You bring them with you. Because at the time, all these karmic seeds are triggered at the time before you even stop breathing. When the karmic seed that was triggered that caused you to get this human body, at the same time, this other lot of billions of karmic seeds kind of were the ones that would produce your personality. They began to be triggered. The next way karma ripens. So one way your karma ripens in this life is your tendencies. We can look at the human world. We've all got legs and arms and noses, but look at our minds. Look how different they are. You've got the extreme of the Mother Teresa's and the Hitlers, haven't you? Anywhere in between these two. The tendencies. And they're all habits. We all come into this life at the first second of conception, Hitler and Mother Teresa, same, programmed with our tendencies. They're all habits we've practiced in the past. It's not, again, not a difficult concept, but we're so used to thinking they came from our mother or father, you know, but they're our tendencies. They're ours. They're our habits. The second way karma, that's called intentions or tendencies similar to the cause, which is having done them before. The second lot, is called experiences similar to the cause. Now we can see we're very social creatures, aren't we? We all live in the framework of other beings. We have a mother, a father, siblings, aunties, uncles, dogs, rats, cockroaches. We live around other sentient beings. So all the way we're seen and treated by other sentient beings is the second way that karma works. It's called experiences similar to the cause. The third one, we can see we're beings in a body, and we have beings we share lives with, but we don't float in the sky. We have environments, don't we? Fish have the sea, we have the earth, we have environments. An environment is whatever's in it that impacts upon you. So the third karma is literally called environmental karma. To give a simple example, the 4 ways that non-killing would ripen. 1, you get a decent rebirth, so a human as an example, just a human body. 2, you'd be born with no tendency to kill. You'd wake up in this life, and as a little child, there'd be it wouldn't even arise in your mind a thought to kill. Now, excuse me, but look at the human realm. It's really kind of tragic, isn't it? Most humans kill something. We might not want to kill those doggies and pussies. We all don't mind killing cockroaches, rats, ants, lice, mosquitoes, who only want, as Lama Yeshe says, who only want just one tiny, tiny drop of your precious blood. We all have a tendency to kill. Most of us, most humans, forget animals, they live by killing, the tragedy. So to have no thought to kill anything is a pretty rare thing on this planet. If you're born a human, it's pretty remarkable. And that's the fruit of non-killing in the past, of programming your mind with non-killing. And for sure, all of these results of non-killing are non-killing practiced in the framework of living in vows of not killing. This is something huge for the Buddha. We'll discuss. The fourth way our non-killing karma would ripen. The third way our non-killing karma would ripen is as an experience. similar to the cause, which is you wouldn't get killed or you wouldn't die young. Now look at the world. Look at the world. Look at the millions of just humans. Forget animals. Animals live by killing each other because they're so full of fear and suffering, isn't it? But look at humans continually being killed by others, or just dying young. Your pet tank of non-killing runs out, and you 1 minute you're there, then you're dead in your soup, isn't it? Babies die, children die, 17-year-olds die, happy people die, healthy people die, because their petrol tank of non-killing karma, in terms of an experience, ran out. Fetuses die. I always use this example. Like I had an abortion when I was 23, right? That means when I was in that bed with that boy, again, not too personal, but it has to be that way. It didn't come out of my head or anything. It came the usual old-fashioned way, not a petri dish. You know, I was in bed with this boy and I was a hippie in London in 1968. And, you know, and then this being came to my womb, right? And this, I always tell this is extra because this is showing the Buddhist about when you get conceived. Generally speaking, they say conception is when the consciousness goes into the egg and sperm. And that usually is when they first meet. So this is, many women tell me they have this experience, and I don't know if some men have it as well. But I knew that I remember it so vividly, that second I knew, I said to myself, oh no, I'm pregnant. And I always quote this as well. A friend of mine had her daughter staying with her. And her daughter, and a young daughter and husband, they were staying while their house was getting built. And the daughter came down for breakfast one morning and said, oh, Mum, I'm pregnant. And the mother said, oh, wow, when did you find out? She said, 40 minutes ago. I mean, I bet some of you women have had that experience. When you got pregnant, you knew at that second. I don't want to be too personal by talking about exactly that second means. You know what I'm talking about? No, anyway, never mind. But it's not enough. She knew, that's right, it's very common. So that's when the consciousness goes in. And I've been a Catholic, but I'd given up that concept, that point. When I was 19, I decided very clearly it was goodbye God, hello boys. I never had guilt, by the way. It was a clear decision. So I didn't think of it as a soul. I just knew the words I heard to myself, felt to myself, a being came into me. That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what the Buddhist views. But I find it just an interesting point. Actually, the Jews apparently say that God doesn't put the soul there for a few months, which is why for them, if you get abortion before that, you're not killing a human being. Different views, isn't it? Anyway, this is my point here. So that the thing discussing this kind of karma called okay, how much time?
1 o'clock.
Oh, that's all. I'll better talk fast. I've got a lot to cover. We've got 2 more weeks, haven't we? Is this right? No, maybe it's that. I don't know. What, do you know? What, do you? Okay. I'm not sure, but it's all right. That's okay. So, okay. So this one called experiences of the cause of past killing, that sentient being who, when they passed away a few weeks before that, it could have been a dog or a human, I've no idea. This particular karmic seed would have been triggered before they stopped breathing, that created the core that was a karmic seed to be born in my body. Karma's personal. You know, think about it. It's a natural law. It's got to be coherent, isn't it? You can't get a rose where you didn't plant a seed. That's absurd. But if you plant a rose seed, you won't get an apple. It's logic, you know. Karma's the same. And karma's personal. You can't meet a person you haven't met before. They can't be kind to you if they haven't been kind to you before. You haven't been kind to them. They can't harm you if you haven't harmed them. This is really logical if we all think of past lives and countless lives and countless actions. It's coherent, you know. It's a shock to us because we think life is random. So this being, this person, due to strong karmic connection with me, and the person there too, the boy, I suppose, came to my womb. That was already programmed before they passed away a few weeks before. And when I hopped in bed with this boy, they came running, you know. But then that second I said, oh my God, I'm pregnant. I said to myself, I'm going to have an abortion. So that thought, again, this is going back to this other one now, the tendency is similar to the cause, the first type of karma, the mind. I've never had that thought before or since. Never. I didn't even have the thought usually to kill fish or mosquitoes. I didn't have that thought. But this thought arose. So this is where karma is very personal. This intense personal karma between me and that person. So meaning this for them was the experience similar to the cause of their past killing me in another life. That ripened as my thought to kill them. So karma is so, it means we've got this interdependent relationship with each other. There's no way you could be kind to me just because you're a nice person if I hadn't created the cause by having been kind to you. There's just no way. Not in this life, 27 lives ago maybe. So that thought arose in my mind. So one, they got a human body, mine, due to one karma of non-killing. We've got all millions of karmas. And then two, another karma was triggered, I mean, in this case, non-killing, to be killed by me. And it all went very smoothly. I mean, I thought that was good luck at the time. I remember it was 1968. They just approved in the national health system in England, where everything's free, they just approved abortions. I thought, oh, I'm lucky, you know. Went to the hospital, Charing Cross Hospital, saw this doctor, psychiatrist. He had black painted walls. It was most odd. I don't know why. I tried to think of a reason why I was valid to get an abortion. He approved, and I went to the hospital. The nurses were very kind. But basically, I gave permission to the doctors and nurses to kill this baby for me tonight. But the poor baby had other suffering. The poor fetus, they didn't scrape it out properly. So I had to have another DNC, you know. So that's another karma of that person. They created the cause to be harmed. I mean, that would have been quite 12 weeks old. I suppose there's definitely some consciousness there, isn't there? For sure, awareness. So I'm just describing an example of karma, you know. So one is the human body due to past non-killing. I got a human body. Two, in this life, well, this person, use the person, they got a human body, mine. Two, I had no idea their tendencies. The poor thing didn't have a chance to get born, so we couldn't tell. They might have been a suck, and I don't know. Do you understand? Three, but they got already, and my point is already, forget about babies dying young, fetuses dying. I would not be surprised, I always say this, that in our culture, if you do your market research, I guarantee you're going to find that there are a massive number of human beings who get a human womb die before they're even born. That's the karma of those sentient beings due to past killing. On the other hand, here we are living until 97 or whatever. That's due to non-killing karma that's also ripening. One, as a human birth. Two, as a tendency not to kill. And three, you live a long old age, you know. That's due to non-killing. So if we're still alive, don't just think you're lucky. Don't just have this hubris of aren't I lucky. No, you're not. Your non-killing karma in your petrol tank has not run out yet. So don't waste it, you know. And you realize you created it. And then the fourth one, environmental result of non-killing is you're fat and healthy, and fat, and whatever you eat and drink and breathe nourishes you and doesn't harm you. Now look at environmental, in that sense, environmental, not meaning, you know, like the way we're talking now, just the physical world itself, look at how it impacts upon you. Now you can see, you know, some people live in a place where the food is delicious, the air is pure, and the water is pure, but they have allergies. You can't even eat a peanut, you'll die from a peanut. Look at the world more and more. No, people, we can't work it out medically why it is. So many allergies. Look at the information on nutritional information on food now. This is the fruit of past killing. That whatever you eat or taste or drink harms you, doesn't nourish you. You know? I always use Warren Buffett as an example. He's like 90 something, this mega rich American fellow, you know, the businessman. I read his biography. And he's probably 90 something. I think he's still fit as a fiddle. Hasn't died yet, so his karma of non-killing hasn't run out yet. That's the experience similar to the cause of non-killing. Then the environmental result, I think his daughter said, I've never seen water pass his lips. And his diet, he's famous for his diet since he's a boy, his total diet for all meals, cheeseburgers, some flavored Coca-Cola, and vanilla ice cream. I mean, he should be dead, right? We think like that. And you hear that the healthiest people on the planet dying at 17, so we can't work it out medically. So non-killing brings you, for example, this one action, one karma brings you a human body. Non-killing causes you to be born in this life with a tendency not to kill. Non-killing causes you to not get killed or die young. And non-killing causes you to have, the food and air and water nourishes you and you have well-being and you're fit, Now, you clearly don't have all four together, isn't it? Some people with no tendency to kill will get killed. Some people who kill all the time will live till they're 97 because there's 4 different tracks of karma that don't have a direct relationship. That's why we get so confused about why good things happen to bad people and why bad things happen to good people. Because we assume there's a logic, if I'm good, only good things should happen to me. But they're 2 separate tracks of karma coming from different bank vaults of karmic seeds. You understand the point? So when we understand these 4, if we want to understand karma even a little bit as a principle, as a philosophy, you have to understand this. Some basics, it's like basics of botany. If I look at the garden and say, oh, there's it, what's that called? That's a rose. Oh, tell me about it. How does it work? Oh, it's botany. Yeah, I know that. Please explain it. No, I can't. Well, at least you should know the fundamentals. If you see you've got experience of someone lying to you, that's part of my future, result of my future past lying. If you are lying, but someone believes you, look at Mr. Trump. I mean, Mr. Trump was famous for his lies, right? I mean, the Washington Post had a list of every single Pinocchio, gave him from 1 to 5 Pinocchios for his lies. They had an entire list since he started his Pinocchios, But we know people who adore Mr. Trump say they know that people accuse him of lying, and they say, we don't care. We believe every word he says. So those people have strong personal karma with Mr. Trump from Mr. Trump's past truth-telling 74 lives ago, such that even when he's lying, they believe. But the rest of us who don't believe Mr. Trump, even if he's telling the truth, because he's lied to us in the past. So we've got to think this through kind of technically, and then it helps you explain to yourself, even theoretically, if you like the view of karma, at least you can apply it as a theory, before we start to actually experience the truth of it. That comes in time. If you don't lie, and let's say you don't lie, you never lie, but people don't believe your words, that's from past lying. If you lie now and people believe your words, that's from past telling the truth. So you just got to nut it out, and it helps us explain, because part of the pain in our lives is when bad things happen to us, and we know we did 0 in this life to cause it. That's where the pain of like racism or sexism, comes in, just by the way, the person you are, the shape of your body, the color of your skin, there's the style of the gender you are, and that because a person, we know that you've done nothing except just be who you are, If someone looks at you and can't stand the shape of you, doesn't like that shape, or puts projections onto you, which is what we do all the time. And you're confused. Now, of course we're confused. What have I done wrong? Nothing. Not in this life. This is the tragedy, And why? But the interesting point is we never ask the question why do good things happen. I've never yet ever, and I always say this, and it's still true, I've never had a person say to me, Robina, why do good things happen? We never ask. And I can spend the rest of the day and the month, the 2 weeks we're here looking at the reasons for this. It's the hubris of attachment and aversion. There's 2 main delusions. So when we can start to understand, if we take the view of karma, if we decide as Buddhists, it's up to us, no one's forcing us, to take this as our working hypothesis, then you just have to apply it. I mean, if you're going to try learning to grow a garden, you can't just say it's botany. It won't get you far. You have to learn what it means, hands-on, interpret the garden that's there, and then know how to change it into the garden you want. That's the approach of karma, You don't just look at your weeds and then go kill yourself because you feel so guilty. You learn, you didn't pull them out, so you got to learn from it, and then you got to go, what do I do now? What's my action? Pull them out and don't grow them again. That's the real learning from karma, using it in a productive way. And then see the happy things. And often the tragedy is we don't see any happy things, we just see all the bad things. So the 4 noble truths, the first one is there is suffering, 3 kinds. First kind, there is suffering of suffering. And this is the explanation of why bad things happen. Pretty clear. It's also flipped over, it's the expression for why good things happen. We have to remember that. Now let's look at the second kind of suffering. which is the suffering of change. This is more tricky. Okay, so what Buddha means by suffering of change is pretty simple. It's what we mean by happiness. It's what we mean by when the good things happen. So Fred is kind to me. Oh, why are you happy with me? Oh, Fred was kind. That's called happiness, a moment of happiness. It's very simple. And as far as I'm concerned, the cause is Fred's kind words. Speaking simply, we all live our lives like this, monkeys and dogs too, you know, because of the assumptions in the mind. That's our interpretation. So again, like I said, Buddha's not arguing, but it doesn't play a role. But he says when we're giving it too much power, it's not the main cause at all. So we look at here, again, reminding our happiness, just reminding the cause of that happy feeling that arose. One is my past virtuous action, driven by a virtue in the past, such that I meet Fred and he does this kind of action, and then happy feelings are triggered inside me. That's a moment of happiness. Now, we only know the two. We know the moment of suffering and we know the moment of happiness. And we want the happy ones and we don't want the suffering ones. So the logic of samsara, the logic of, we're all samsaric philosophers, basically. We live according to the samsaric philosophy. The samsaric philosophy says that unhappy, you know, suffering comes from the bad thing Fred does, so you get rid of Fred. And then happiness comes from Mary being kind, so you bring Mary into your life and try to keep Mary doing nice things because you want happy feelings. That's the method we use. That's how we try to get happiness to stop suffering. But we can see it doesn't work, doesn't it? We can see, so we're to the first kind of suffering. So if you want to stop that one at least, this is Buddha's view. If you want a next life, make sure you don't have any negative tendencies, you don't have nothing bad happens to you, and the environment is delicious and nourishes you. Just don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, tick the box. It's not complicated. Now, the suffering of change is more nuanced. The suffering of change, unfortunately, like I said, is what we refer to as happiness. So that happy moment when Fred is kind to me, Buddha would say that moment of happiness, because it's driven by attachment, which we're going to describe, it's actually a moment of suffering, but it's more subtle suffering. Because, forget Fred, use the chocolate cake, best example. I don't really like chocolate cake, but I always use the example. You know? I don't know why. So I always get chocolate cakes. I like chocolate. Hint, hint. And not chocolate. I can't stand dark chocolate, by the way. I love milk. This is not a hint, I'm just talking. I love milk chocolate. I don't like dark chocolate. I can't imagine how anyone likes dark chocolate. So bitter. I like sweet. Anyway, this is by the way. But use the chocolate cake example. So, okay, why is attachment the cause of suffering? Because it seems to be the cause of happiness. Okay. So there's the chocolate cake. So at the moment, I have the suffering of suffering, which is the suffering of not having a full stomach. So I'm hungry. That's an example of a suffering, of bad things. You don't want to be hungry, right? So then you think, oh, how am I going to fix the problem? Then you think, oh, chocolate cake. So the thought arises, and then you stand up and you go do the job getting cake. And you visualize chocolate cake, you're imagining it. You maybe go down the street, you go to, you know, and you're thinking of the chocolate cake, you know exactly the one you want, then you order it, and then it comes and it's on the plate. And all this has been driven, yeah, by intention, go to the shops, using your intelligence. But the key thing that's running is a state of mind called attachment, which has been discussed yesterday, is the main, effectively for the Four Noble Truths, the main cause of our suffering. Because what it is, it's a state of mind that it comes from emotional hunger, and it then hankers after something, and then believing that when I get that chocolate cake, I will get happy feelings. Now that's true. Buddha agrees. You will. You do. You build up this story, and what attachment in the mind is doing, and we can't distinguish it from anything else, it's over-exaggerating the deliciousness of the cake. It's over-exaggerating. This is what it does automatically. It's over-exaggerating the power of the cake to make me happy. Fred the same, all the same. It over-exaggerates all the time. And it comes from emotional hunger. So, and then it brings massive expectation, doesn't it? We know that. So the cake is, and finally the time comes when the cake will go in the mouth, isn't it? And we know it'll go here. It doesn't go there or there. We don't get confused. We know where it goes because of habit, karma. So the cake goes in. We know it triggers an extremely pleasant feeling. That's called happiness, a pleasant feeling. That's true. Buddha doesn't argue with that. So initially it seems shocking when he says that actually it's a suffering. It's really called suffering. And we can't see that. So what's the suffering? Well, the broad way of putting it, it's called the suffering of change. Very simply, because we know 4 pieces later, this is very simple, isn't it? How does the cake look now? Initially, it looks so divine, you practically want to faint, isn't it? Vibrating deliciousness, and it's just begging you to eat it. We know this, but we know 4 pieces later, it now looks repulsive. We know that, and if we ate it, we'd vomit. I mean, we really do know this experience, even without being silly, you know? So what's going on? What's happened? Why is it changed from a happy feeling to a happy feeling? What's the process? And this is the suffering of attachment. So what's happening is this. The main energy of attachment, like we talked yesterday, is actually the feeling of dissatisfaction. That's its most primordial undercurrent. And why dissatisfaction is the main function, the main energy of attachment, is because for countless lives, we've believed the cake will make us happy. We've over-exaggerated the deliciousness of the cake for countless lives. And we every day believe it's going to bring me happiness, and we forget that all it brought was a stuffed stomach. And we forget that the next day and we try again. So our disappointment has been building up over eons. So dissatisfaction is like disappointment. So as you're eating the cake, you've built up this massive story, so delicious, so divine, the anticipation. And that's just the anticipation of the pleasure of the cake. Look at the anticipation of the pleasure of a new boyfriend. I mean, that's the most divine pleasure in the universe. I'm not being mean. It's not being sarcastic. I remember. Do you understand? So it's an exaggeration, and it's real build-up, a real anticipation. So this dissatisfaction is finally we're thinking, now I'm going to get satisfied. Now the pain and dissatisfaction will go away. So what happens is first mouthful, it triggers another state of mind called pleasure. Attachment is not pleasure, and pleasure is not attachment. They're separate states of mind. But the method we use to get pleasure, as far as we're concerned, is only to get it, is to follow attachment. So pleasure will be triggered, definitely. But what happens? Even as you're eating the first piece, you get the pleasure, but then attachment is still not satisfied. So you're still hungry. You're wanting the second mouthful. And there's a hope that the satisfaction will come from the second mouthful. But you have the second mouthful, and you're still not, attachment is still not satisfied. And the tragedy is, if we analyze it, the moment of pleasure after the second mouthful is just not as good as the first one. So we're getting a bit distressed already. It's only the second mouthful. Are you with me, people? So then you try, maybe I'll try again. The pleasure surely has to come in a minute. Surely satisfaction will come in a minute. So then you have a third mouthful, and it still triggers a pleasant feeling, which is slightly less, but the dissatisfaction is growing, not getting better. And you keep trying. Second piece, third piece. So I remember this one, those television shows where they have the people who have suffering, and one young woman, she was very little. She was like 400 pounds, 500 pounds or something, And there's just the discussion about her suffering and attachment. They don't use that word. And you could see it so nakedly. And her mother said, oh, she's always been like this. She never felt full. I know absolutely as a kid, I didn't know what satisfaction meant. I only thought the only way I knew to stop eating was when I was stuffed. Are we familiar with that? This is the suffering of attachment. This process is completely instinctive. That's why we have to unpack it and observe it. The energy of attachment is one energy of attachment is the excitement and the anticipation before you get the cake. It's driven by dissatisfaction, but it's anticipation, and then you're excited. You're blissfully excited. The best part of the boyfriend is the anticipation of the date, isn't it? The cake is the same, and it's downhill from there. I mean, you can't hear my point. Not being mean or nasty or depressing. We don't analyze the process. It's incredibly subtle. Because the pleasure of the first mouthful is actually the best pleasure. but attachment is still not satisfied. So hungrily wanting the second mouthful, the second piece, the third piece. And then after the fourth piece, you know it looks disgusting now, the cake, and you would vomit. But we forget all of that the next day. Do you understand? And Buddha says we've been doing this for eons. So it is kind of shocking, but we can analyze it. This is scientific truth. This is not kind of religion. And it's a hard one to get past. It's incredibly subtle. This is really advanced. I mean, to give up attachment is a really high realization, because this is the grossest level. This is the grossest level of it. So Buddhist teachings are quite sophisticated reading. Are we communicating?
Yes.
So the suffering of change, all it means is there is some joy and deliciousness, but it doesn't last. It leads inexorably, inevitably, logically to the suffering of pain, the first kind, stuffed stomach. And look at the world. We say bipolar. I'm not being sarcastic, I promise you. We are all bipolar. It's a question of degree. We go up and down like yo-yos. You know, it's the mindlessly happy and then devastated. This is what depression is. This is when the mind's devastated and you go up again and down again. This is attachment and aversion. The three poisons, the root delusion, which is when you realize emptiness, you get rid of that one, forget that one. The main voice of the root delusion, ignorance, the ego, the one that the sense of self we talked yesterday, that gives rise to this attachment. And then attachment, when it gradually changes, it changes into aversion. Look at the cake. So attachment is one thing, pleasure is another. Aversion is one thing, and unpleasant feelings are another. They're separate parts of the mind, and they all relate to each other. So what happens is the belief of attachment in the deliciousness of the cake, and the belief and the expectation of the happy feelings that will come, and the somehow desperate wish that when you get these happy feelings this time that they will last. We want them to last, even though our experience tells us they don't. But they don't. They can't logically, because they're driven by attachment. And then when attachment doesn't get what it wants, when the stomach's got stuffed full of four pieces, attachment has pleasure has gradually diminished and turned into unpleasant. And attachment has gradually changed from all the excitement and anticipation to aversion and disgust. This is the Buddhist analysis. We all recognize it. So how about some questions?
So
You go.
you said
I can't hear. A bit louder.
yeah, you said there's no creator, but
Buddhist view, yeah.
yeah, but then you also said that like our mind is maybe the creator of our karma.
Who's talking to me? I can't quite, because my glasses aren't on and I can't see, and I can't get over this thing here. So I'll just have to. So go on, say it again. You have the mic. It's a good idea for the people on the Zoom. Have the mic, please. Yes. Go on.
You said, on the one hand, you said there's no creator.
No external person running the show who makes us and punishes us and rewards us. That's a creator.
Okay, but then you said that we are our mind is.
What's wrong with your microphones, darling? Here, people, they're not working. This one over there's not working. Go now.
But you said the mind is the creator.
What's wrong with that? Create doesn't. I said an external creator. I'm not talking about a create is a perfectly reasonable verb, isn't it? You create a cup if you make a cup, don't you? You can say you're the creator of the cup. The Christian and Muslim views say there's a being out there whose job is to create me, and then whose job is to punish me and reward me. I'm just saying there's not one of those. Do you see?
Yeah.
Can you hear the difference?
Oh, yeah.
No?
Yes.
Oh, good. But that's enough for you. Okay. So I say we create our own happiness in the sense that, you know, by you practicing piano, you create the musician you become. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, Buddha says by you practicing virtue and not practicing non-virtue and changing your mind, you create a happy person, yourself. That's the Buddhist way of putting it, very simple. Dalai Lama says karma is like self-creation. Put it like that. Do you understand?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Someone else, please. Yes.
So you mentioned something about
being programmed before death.
Yes,
Can you go into a little bit
I
more
will.
detail?
Exactly, I will.
And
Yes,
then how long does it actually take?
I'll let you know. I'll tell you. I'll give you a rough idea. This is all described really well in Lama Yeshe's book called How to Face Death Without Fear. It's a really excellent book, like a handbook. It's fantastic, I tell you. You want to help your pet die? You want to help your grandma die? I don't mean kill them, but help them go through the process. I mean, help them through the process of dying. This you can't get better. It's a handbook of so much information. So basically, roughly speaking, the process is like this. And this is actually from the more advanced levels in Buddhist psychology and philosophy called the Vajrayana, the Tantrayana. And this is interesting that it's the same model that the Tibetan medical system is based on. So basically, we're all made, we've got gross, we've got gross body, which comes along inextricably with our gross consciousness, which is our sensory consciousness, right? Then we have gross subtle body and our subtler consciousness, which is our mental states. And this subtle body, this is the bag of bones, this is the gross one. So the death process is the gradual deconstruction of these stages of what we are. So they describe it in terms of 8 stages of gradual deconstruction of the components of the person. So from this model, they talk about we've got gross consciousness, which is the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, which is the part of our mind, which is not physical, that exists in dependence upon the eyeball, the ear, and so on and so forth. That gradually ceases through the first 4 stages of death. Okay. So by the time you stop breathing, that grosser level has ceased completely. And that's when the world calls it death, right? When you stop breathing, when the heart stops and the lungs stop. But that's not death for the Buddha's view, this view, certainly. But now your subtler level of mind, which is your mental states, inextricably linked with this subtle physical body, and they call that, there's like this 72,000 subtle channels throughout the body, and coursing through all these channels are all these different wind energies or prana, which is similar to the Ayurvedic system, the ancient Indian system, the ancient Chinese system. This is the Tibetan one coming from that. So there's these subtle wind energies coursing through all these channels, and they're all inextricably linked to our different states of mind, like love, compassion, kindness. It's a very different model. We're not discussing your brain here, okay? So when you go to your Tibetan doctor, she'll feel your pulses, or your Chinese doctor, but the Tibetan one especially. And she'll feel exactly, well, the Chinese similar, but I'm talking the Tibetan medical, I'm talking the Tibetan one here. She'll feel your pulses and she'll feel the imbalance of certain wind energies that she knows are directly related to your attachment, which is why you've got anxiety. She'll feel another wind energy directed to your anger, which is why you're having all these storms, these rages. So that all the states of mind are related to these different physical, subtler physical energies. So the next stages of death, these are gradually ceasing, gradually ceasing, gradually ceasing, gradually ceasing, until eventually we get to what they call very subtle consciousness, which is the subtlest level of your conscious being. And this is way more subtle than we think in our modern world, right? And that is inextricably linked with this very subtle kind of wind energy, and is inextricably linked. And all our karmic imprints of everything we've ever said and done and thought are programmed in this mind. And when that leaves the body, that's when death is. And that can be up to 2 days, 3 days after you stop breathing. So the traditional, this approach, and Mahamudra talks about it in his book, is you wouldn't touch, your pussycat as well, best not to touch the body for 3 days. You'd have prayers being said, you'd do practices, you wouldn't disturb the body. And then about 3 days, it can leave sooner, but it's best to, that's a very typical one, you leave it for 3 days, which is a big issue in the West because, with the one about giving organs, right, they cut the organs out before the person's even, probably the mind's even left. It can be quite difficult. Lama Yeshe talks about that in his book. And then what happens, your mind, okay, when the death, this 8 stages of death starts, which could be a couple of hours before you stop breathing, this gradual deconstruction starts. By about the 3rd stage, when already your eyes are gone, your ears are beginning to go, but about the 3rd point is when the karmic seed will be triggered that will already program you for your next life. That's already been programmed even before you stop breathing. So if a virtuous, so in your case, being a human, we can deduce that a virtuous karmic seed of non-killing was triggered before you stop breathing, and your death would have been very peaceful. Very, very blissful even. Because as your mind gets more subtle, as you go towards stopping breathing, your mind is still there and it gets much more subtle. You're almost like seeing your future happy life coming because your mind's more subtle. If a negative seed is triggered before you stop breathing, your death will be very awful. very tortured, be freaking out. You'd have visions of like your future and everything. It'd be quite painful. So it's really crucial. As Lama Yeshe says in this book, if you want to help anybody in this life, when they need you most is at the time of death, because that's where you help a person navigate this process. And that means helping a person become peaceful more than anything, because when the mind is peaceful, it enables a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered. Because there's this natural relationship. Look at your own life between the mind being peaceful and the mind being virtuous. When you're peaceful, you can be spacious and loving and kind. If your mind is freaking out, you can't think of anything but your own self. You're having a panic attack, you know. So it's crucial to help a person, including your dog, your pussycat, the mouse, the mosquito, be peaceful. Allow to hear mantras, all kinds of advice from the gives to help that happen. You with me? So then your mind will leave the body, and then it goes into this sort of subtle state, like a dream state, very much like a dream state. Your subtle mind, the only time we really experience that is when we have dreams. Or those weird things that happen in dreams. That's your subtle mind playing things out, all your memories in your mind, right? So that this intermediate state, or bardo they call it, is like a dream state. And you can be there for several weeks. And then when your new mummy and daddy hop into bed, you leave the bardo and you run like a magnet. You join the egg and sperm. There's never more than a few weeks between lifetimes, we would say. We've had countless of them.
A few weeks before life.
Never before, never more than a few weeks.
So it's not happening when someone is healthy.
I can't hear you, sweetheart.
It's not happening when you're healthy. It's
What do
only
you mean by
happening when
Oh,
you're
the process is a very,
closing
no,
to
it's a
death.
very literal. It's like, this is what's interesting. The death process is exactly the same physiologically and psychologically to the sleep process. So the greatest meditators can learn to utilize the process of sleep, staying conscious throughout it, so that they can practice to be conscious of death. It's the same process, the same thing happens. So the going to sleep is like when you die. I mean that in the sense of the way the deconstruction of the elements, you know, when you're asleep, you know, you can't feel anything, you can't see anything, because your senses have ceased. And then you accept that the difference of death is you actually stop breathing. But here you just go, all the senses cease, the gross consciousness ceases. Then you wake up into a dream, don't you? That's your subtle mind. That's a bit similar to the intermediate state after you leave the body. And then when you wake up next morning, you wake up in the same body. The difference with death is you wake up in another body. So it's very similar. So the great yogis can utilize the experience of sleep without losing consciousness by meditating really subtly and well, so that they train themselves for death. And why they want to do that is because when you're at the time of death, the subtlest level of mind is the most potent, capable level of mind, where you can get realizations very quickly and even get enlightened at that point, because your mind is so powerful. That makes sense? Okay. Thank you. Yes.
So as we were speaking about death, I'd like to know what's going to make my petrol run low fast. If I kill a chicken for food,
Yes,
if I kill a roach, or if I kill a person, what's the value of the difference?
the difference. Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? Well, first of all, I think this is important to then look at how we even create karma. So in order for any action we do to be what's called a complete karma, which would be a karmic, leave a seed in the bank vault. Buddha clearly didn't talk about bank vaults, but it's a good analogy. If you want a complete karmic seed, that'll one that will bring a type of rebirth. So in our case, we can deduce a complete karmic seed of non-killing was put into our bank vault when a particular action of non-killing, and that was able to ripen as this particular rebirth. So a killing karmic seed, to create a complete action of killing, in general, there are 4 things that have to be in place for you to create the karma of killing for a complete action, such that when it was triggered at the time of your death, it will ripen as a future suffering rebirth, like an animal or a spirit or other kind of suffering being. So one, in order to qualify as a complete action, there has to be one, in this case, a living being, the cockroach, the dog, the human. It's just general first, okay? So they've got to be a living being. Second, your mind involved in it. And there's 2 things there. There's more to it than this, but this is basic. There has to be, crucially, the thought, just the bare bones thought, intention, not like good intention, but merely the intention, I will kill the cockroach. I will kill whoever it is. It can be very quick, but it has to be there. And then second, the crucial piece, that intention is driven by a motivation. So let's say it's a typical one for a cockroach. Oh, how disgusting, cockroaches in my house. No way. So that's your motivation. Anger. You understand? Third, you do the action. Fourth, result, dead cockroach. So simply speaking, that will be a complete action of killing. Now, equally, the action of non-killing. 1, a cockroach. 2, intention. Oh, I must not harm the cockroach. Motivation, compassion. 3, you save the cockroach. 4, you release it. Thank you, Robina. Happy cockroach. That's a complete action of non-killing. Do you understand my point? So now you've got then you qualify it. So clearly some person could have a very mild motivation for killing. So some person could kill the cockroach with not even realizing they're killing it. Then you can almost argue there's no karma if you don't realize you're doing it. There's no intention. There can't be if you don't see it. But you can have a cockroach and you don't even see it, right? So the cockroach is there, but your mind is not involved at all. You don't see it. There's no intention and there's no motivation. You could argue almost there's no karma because karma has to be having the mind involved. 3, your foot goes on the cockroach, and 4, dead cockroach. But you could almost say there's almost no karma there. Do you understand? So then that example. Then you've got a person who just kind of accidentally kills the cockroach. Then you've got a person who is annoyed and kills the cockroach. Then you've got a person who loves torturing cockroaches. So clearly the motivation is the key factor. So if you love killing cockroaches, you pull its legs out slowly because you enjoy suffering, that clearly is a heavier action. You get my point? Because the motivation is the key thing that determines it. Now, the other way of qualifying the actions is in terms of the kind of being. So, I mean, without being mean, without being kind of hierarchical, you could argue it's heavier to kill a human than to kill a cockroach. But it depends on your motivation. You know, it depends on your motivation. So if you had to choose between killing a cockroach and killing a person, you could argue it's probably trying not to kill the person because at least as a person, they've got more potential to do something with their life. Cockroaches and humans want to be happy. There's no difference there. And if you've got total compassion, you'll have equal compassion for all of them. But you could argue it's heavier to kill a human, or it's heavier to kill a dog than a cockroach. I mean, you know, because a dog, it's just you can it sort of makes sense in a way, but not trying to say, well, it doesn't matter if you kill a cockroach. I mean, we try not to kill any living being as a Buddhist view, you know. Does that make sense a little bit? But the key factor is your motivation. You could even say, you could argue, and this is very common now with our pussycats and our doggy woggies. I mean, poor veterinarians spend their lives killing animals now. It's so tragic. I wouldn't like to be a vet at all. It sounds like we're being so noble because we see that the cat is suffering, but this is a really interesting discussion on this one, okay? So the key point the Buddhist view would say, try not to harm. The fundamental point behind all the Buddhist teachings is don't try and harm any being. Try not to harm. Best. For your sake as much as anything, because you don't want to be programmed with negative actions. Of course you don't. But also because you want to be compassionate. So then the trouble is your pussycat is suffering. It's very clear. Then you think, well, it makes sense that I should kill my pussycat because I don't want my pussycat to suffer. That sounds logical, doesn't it? Now, if pussycat, this is the point from the Buddhist view, but as we know, the Buddhist view would say all beings, necessarily their consciousness will continue because consciousnesses are endless. They never end. So whatever the being is, a cockroach, your grandma, that when they die, they'll go through the same process and their mind will leave the body. And this is the point, depending on the karmic seed that's triggered in the cockroach's mind in exactly the same way as your grandma's mind, it will take a type of rebirth, a positive, a suffering one or a happy one. Now, whether it's a cockroach or your grandma, if you have this Buddhist view, you would want to do whatever you can to ensure they die peacefully so that a virtuous karmic seed can be triggered so that they can both get at least another decent human rebirth in their next life and meet the Dalai Lama and have a spiritual practice. That's your wish. Now, who has the power, who has the wisdom to know with confidence that if I kill my grandmother now, exactly at this moment, or the cockroach, who can be certain that they will get another decent human rebirth? Who can be certain that a virtuous karmic seed will be triggered? We simply don't have that wisdom. So that's why the Buddhist view is, it's not just, oh, don't kill. It's because you don't have the wisdom to know with confidence that when you kill your grandmother or the cockroach, that it will definitely get another decent human rebirth. And that's the wish. So therefore you do everything you can to support your grandmother and the cockroach and not to harm it and to give it a conducive environment, at least for the little cockroach, to put it in a place where it won't have so much fear, where it will be safe, and you let it hear mantras, your grandmother the same. But it's not easy for us because we look at the cat squealing or we look at the dog, it looks like it's suffering. And half the time, I think, if we look carefully, it's our own attachment that can't stand the suffering to see it. We'd rather just make it all go away. But there's lots of ways of helping your pussycat and your dog, you know. I mean, even just recently, a friend of mine, you can't guarantee, even if you don't kill your dog, you still can't guarantee it'll get a decent human rebirth, but you can do lots of things to help it. This is what Lama Yeshe's advice in the book is incredible. The power of mantra is so special, you know, so powerful. Even when you're unconscious, it can benefit the mind, certainly of animals. So a friend of mine, her dog was suffering, and the vet was recommending very highly that she, you know, kill the dog. I know we don't say that word, we say euthanize. It's called kill. Might as well call it what it is. And she was really struggling to do what was best for the dog. And I didn't want to force her. I just gave her the Buddhist view. I said, you think about it, sweetheart. So she thought about it and she decided she would play the medicine Buddha mantra for the dog to hear. And she said it was just absolutely amazing how it helped the dog immediately. And this is one example. The dog became more peaceful. He started to eat his food again. And I think he's still alive. You know, they said, but he wasn't suffering. So many things can help the animal, but there has to be the wish to do whatever we can to first alleviate its suffering and pain as much as we can now, but to ensure when it does die, it's peaceful. Then that can help it then a virtuous karmic seed be triggered for the future. That's the view in the Buddhist idea. You know? And of course, it's not a hard one. It's a hard one for us, but this is the Buddhist approach. Are we communicating, people? Now, I've got no idea what time it is. What is it? Can't see. Oh my gosh, time to go home already. We've hardly started. Yeah, come on. There's a few more minutes. I was late anyway, so let's go.
So
Come on then.
is it in the example of euthanization or killing, so every animal has karma too, and they're living out
All
their
the same,
karma.
exactly.
So when one kills out of compassion,
Yeah, I
supposedly,
understand.
are you cutting that being's karma short to
I
where
understand.
they can't? So then they're going to have to come back and do that again anyway,
No, I
because you're
understand.
not letting them live it out.
No, it's not a question so much of that. It's not quite that. It's not quite that. First, there are two things. Well, I said something white on the screen. I can't see what it says. Is it okay? It's all right. Everything's okay?
Yeah, it's fine. They're just asking if anyone has questions.
Okay, good, good. Yes, I want to have questions from you people. Okay, so there's two things. This is a crucial piece to understand. One is you doing an action, right? You're the one who does the killing, let's say. So one is your pussycat. Two, your mind is involved. Intention, I will kill the pussycat. Two, and then in there is your motivation. And it is true, it's compassion. Okay, it's probably for most of us compassion mixed with attachment and fear, but there's still compassion there. You're not having the thought, I want to harm my pussycat. That's clear. So you can argue your motivation is pretty good. You with me? Three, you do the action before the cat dies. Right? That's now from your point of view, you can argue you did okay. You don't create much negative karma. This is for you. Now let's look at the cat. So the cat, one, it dies, and depending on the karmic seed that was triggered as the death process started, which would have started when you did the injection, the process would have started, and depending on what was in its mind at that moment, and because you can't guarantee it, it's a bit like Russian roulette. Depending on what arose in its mind at that time, that karmic seed would then determine already its future life, whether it's suffering or happy. Now, because you can't guarantee, but especially if it's an animal, there's going to be enormous fear and ignorance in its mind. It's likely to trigger a negative karmic seed, which means when you put the cat from the frying pan into the fire. So therefore, the first question we must ask is, well, I wonder, I'm fine, karmically, I did okay because I had a good motivation, but I wonder if I actually helped my cat. That's the question to ask. And because we can't answer it with definitive certainty, then we have to be cautious. That's the reasoning behind it.
I have a ricochet. I did
Microphone.
Sorry. I did kitty hospice actually, and I was
What time you want?
I did kitty hospice. I had ricochets helping me when my cats were dying,
Good, fantastic.
and it was amazing. But I was ostracized immensely by veterinarians
Sorry, by who?
By the veterinarians, they thought
Oh,
it was
because you kept the
cruel
cat
and
alive. No, exactly.
horrible.
That's right.
They were saying, you know, when I
I
did
know.
hospice, they thought I was a
know.
drug addict
That's right.
because I was giving them, I mean, literally,
That's right. I
it was
understand.
unbelievable. But
I understand.
that's the part and I always thought if the owners are taking, this is just a thought that just popped in my head, and if the cats or the dog literally is experiencing their loved one killing them, like if they're looking like it's because they don't know.
I know, but they're not going to be aware of that. I think that's
A different.
yeah, that's
consciousness.
yeah. The key thing is the thing to think about. Two things is one, we want to try and avoid creating negative karma for our own sake. So even if you have a good motivation, you don't create much negative karma, but you're fine. But the real reason in the first place is to help your cat. So you've got to ask the question, what's best for my cat? And because we're limited in our wisdom, you just you try not to play Russian roulette. You just do our best. We can't guarantee anything, but at least then you, as virtuous for you, and you don't know that. And the other thing is, you see, even a little bit of suffering is purifying the cat's mind. It's like pulling out the weeds. And if you're playing, let's say, mantra to the cat, and the mantra can help its mind at a subtle level, even with suffering, that'll help its mind. And the Buddha will hook the mind of your creature and help it get a decent rebirth. So it's not, you can't make it perfect. We often try to think we're like God ourselves and trying to make everything perfect. We can't. You've got to accept sometimes that all we can do within the wisdom we've got is do our best. All we can do is that. Do you understand my point? I mean, communicating people.
Venerable Robina, there's a question on the
Yes,
chat.
good. Please, yes.
They're asking, isn't it more likely that if the cat is in pain, a negative karmic seed will ripen versus putting it to sleep and it is in less pain?
Yeah, but the point is because, okay. The main suffering isn't the physical pain, and that's for the humans as well. The main suffering is the delusions in the mind, and the main suffering is fear, and fear is what triggers the negative karma to ripen. So I think your pussycat, or your dog especially, because it adores you. You've got your dog, you're there, it trusts you, it loves you, and you're playing mantras. The mantra is blessing the mind of your dog. The mantra is bringing the Buddhas there, if you have confidence in that kind of concept, that can help your dog's mind at a subtle level. And because your dog is feeling you, trusting you, it won't have so much fear, because mind is one thing, body is another, and we can work with the mind. You can medicate physical pain, but if you can't also help the mind be peaceful, and just because there's physical pain doesn't always mean there's going to be mental pain. So we just have to think about this. Again, there's no guarantee, but just knowing you're stopping the physical suffering doesn't mean there's not intense fear in the mind of that being, including humans. Because this is the point about the time of death. Intense grasping is triggered as well at the time of death. So to help navigate that grasping, the best way is to help them feel safe and secure and have mantras playing, which can bring the blessings of the Buddhas. We are still not guaranteed. And it still doesn't mean, I'm not trying to say do or don't. I'm going to give you the way to think. We have to make our own decisions, and just know the logic behind it.
Follow-up question. This one's quick. Do you have mantras we can use, recording, or who can guide us for a mantra?
Yeah, this book of Lama Zopa's has got full of the 2/3 of the book is all these 87 practices, numbered from 1 to 87, some sutras, lots of practices, lots of mantras, many, many, many things in this book. It's so rich with information. And the key mantra, if Lama Zopa says if you want to do one practice, do Medicine Buddha. And you just YouTube Lama Zopa singing Medicine Buddha. It's very delicious. Play that for your animals, play it for your grandma, play it for yourself, Medicine Buddha is the most precious one you can do. And you just have just YouTube Lama Zopa Medicine Buddha. You'll find. There is that, exactly. There are lots of these. From the EPM, you get them as a CD of lots of mantras at the time of death. There are lots of these mantras. And I've seen the evidence of them blessing. I mean, there's so many stories of humans as well. I mean, I always quote this story. I said, because the subtle mind, which is our dream mind, we know from dreams you can be conscious, you can be aware of what's going on. In a coma, it's the same. So you can hear sound. You can't see maybe, but you can hear sound. Sound is very powerful. And Sanskrit mantra is said to be the most powerful sound. So I remember even just words. A friend of mine in Sydney years ago was in a coma, total coma. And I asked the husband permission to go there at night because it was quick to drive at night. It was a long way away. So anyway, I got there and I just sing, I'd say prayers in her ear. And every now and again I'd say, Judy, Tsongsa Kensei Rinpoche is praying for you. It was one of her lamas. I'd asked her students, his students. And then I'd say, Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen is praying for you. And I go a couple of weeks in the run of the night, and she came out of a coma. She was fine. And she said the only thing she remembered, she said, was this husky voice. She didn't know it was me. She thought it was a blue lady coming through the window saying exactly those words. I've heard so many stories like this, the power of sound and the relationship between the Buddhas, you know. I mean, one person I know had got Lyme's disease and it was the deepest of comas. And the only thought he could find in his mind was the Manjushri mantra. He said Ling Rinpoche told him, never forget this mantra. And he swears that's what enabled him to come to consciousness again. You hear so many stories like this, you know. Any holy sounds can be, and because they can benefit at a subtle level for the subtle mind of the animal or the human, and then help trigger a virtuous karmic seed. I mean, I'm not trying to say it's going to be perfect, but the thing is to try and have the thought not to follow our fears. And this is the trouble, unfortunately, because so many, I'm not trying to criticize anybody. I mean, vets do an amazing job. But we're so now, the commonest view in the world now is it's good to kill because of the suffering of the body. So it's hard to get past that and not feel like you're being brutal, you know. I mean, my friend agonized because her vet was very clearly telling us best for the animal. And she saw from her own experience, it completely changed the animal, just having the mantra play. So, I mean, we have to think about these things. We have to think about. What else, people? Any more questions?
Anthony.
More questions?
Which Manjushri mantra?
Om Arapasanati. That's the mantra. Om Arapasanati. It's good for the mouth. You can hear it. Om Arapasanati. So for wise words, you know, sharp words, clear words. Om Arapasanati. I just want you to remember it. So listen, what are our topics for the rest of the 2 weeks? We should say it so we make sure we cover everything.
Tomorrow we have the 7 prayer at 3 p.m. to 4:30. Tuesday is the workshop is in the mind, 7 p.m.
We'll be more about this.
Wednesday, death and impermanence.
I'll be more
7
about
to
this.
9.
Okay, good.
Friday, karma.
Be more about this.
And Saturday, a day-long karma.
Oh my God, more about this. Same old. We'll cover the lot, okay? It's all right.
And then Sunday, refuge, and then the afternoon refuge.
Okay. We'll cover everything then.
Yes, and then Monday, bodhicitta, and then Tuesday, green Tara and Guru Yoga.
We'll cover the lot.
Yeah.
We'll cover the entire course to Buddhahood. Okay. All right, darling people, we'll go home now on our Sundays and we think whatever we've listened to, all these seeds we've planted, because nothing goes astray. One of the Buddhist teachings is that whatever any being sees, hears, tastes, touches, smells, thinks about it, stays in the mind as a memory. So it's very delicious. Then there's the karmic seeds we plant. We nourish these seeds. May we nourish these seeds from this moment forward so that they do ripen, no matter how long in the future, as our Buddhahood, so we can be of benefit to suffering sentient beings and have the wisdom to know. I'm going to tell you one story to finish about this wisdom business. Sorry, finish. This is where, as Buddha often says, we can't really begin to help sentient beings until we've got clairvoyance. So clairvoyance sounds hippy-trippy to us, doesn't it, in the West? But this is a natural consequence of getting single point of concentration, shamatha, this genius technique these Indians invented before the Buddha, you know, that he uses. Buddha, one of the key techniques in Buddhism, single point of concentration. Crystal clear clairvoyance. You can see the past, the future, the minds of others. Not just hippy trippy. I was a princess 14 lives ago or something. Crystal clear. This is the capability of our minds from the Buddhist perspective. So there's this particular story about our friend Harry helping the monks, one monk at Kopan Monastery in Kathmandu. And late 80, early, just went on, here we go again, late 70s. And he was helping one of the monks, who was a Sherpa, who was very sick, and he found a doctor to help the monk. And he told Lama Yeshe, who was his Lama, my Lama, that he found a doctor to help this monk. And Lama said, he doesn't need a doctor, he's okay. So Harry, trusting Lama's wisdom, didn't get a doctor. And Harry observed this monk got sicker and sicker. And then he eventually went up to the mountains to his family, and he died. So on the face of it, it looks like Lama was being cruel, doesn't it? Allowing the monk to die. Then Lama Lunda, the abbot of Kopan, said to Harry, well, this is Lama's wisdom. He's got clairvoyance, which means you've got to understand this is possible, you know. He could see exactly the karma this monk created 47 lives ago, whatever, that is the cause of this present suffering. He had, of course, wisdom and infinite compassion, only wanted to do what's best for the monk. He could see crystal clear that if he'd gotten a doctor, he would have been better and he would have had a good life. But he wouldn't have finished this very heavy karma, and his next life would have been much worse. On the other hand, by having the suffering and by dying young, and he died very peacefully with all the people around, he died a very good death, he completely finished the karma, next life fantastic. Now, who has that wisdom? We don't have, and we've got the potential to have that wisdom. So all we can do until we have that level of wisdom is use what wisdom we have got. This is why His Holiness says compassion is not enough. We need wisdom. And as Lama Zopa says, meaning well is not enough. We need wisdom. And wisdom comes from working on your mind. Abiding by the laws of karma, working on your mind, lessening attachment, and then eventually getting some realizations. That's the wisdom we need. Then we're capable of helping others. So it's a whole different kettle of fish. That's it. Finish with that. So thank you, everybody. Jangchul, Senchok, Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Yuchi, Ke Panyampa, Me Ba Yang, Gong Ne, Gong Nu, Velva Sho. That's it. Thank you, darling people. Very kind, everybody. Thank you, thank you. I keep looking there, but I've got to look there. I forgot. Sorry, you people. I'm supposed to look at you there. Goodbye. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, people. Well, thank you. I'll sit for a minute. You go.
Thank you.
I'm going to relax you for a minute.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. Hope to see you again. Please take care.